Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Hello and welcome to the afternoon agenda here on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now this show is all about your opinion and mine. So it's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or should be on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we're covering today on the afternoon agenda. It's a minute to midnight in the climate crisis and we need to act now. That's what Boris Johnson has told world leaders in Glasgow for COP26. We'll have analysis and the latest developments live from the UN summit. Parents criticise girl guiding for promoting asexuality awareness in social media posts. Should the leading youth movements for girls be focusing more on skills and activities and less on sexuality? And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about boomers. Are we penalising the young too much to pay for the elderly? That's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Polly Middlehurst. This is your news on GB News at 4 o'clock. Boris Johnson has urged the world's leaders to take action on climate change, telling them it's 1 minute to midnight. The Prime Minister was speaking on the opening day of the COP26 climate summit, which is being held in Glasgow. Around 120 heads of state and government saw the speech, including US President Joe Biden, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Boris Johnson said our children would pay the price of their inaction.
The longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act, because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Well, the environmentalist David Attenborough is also at COP26, and he told delegates, again, that the time for action is now.
In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellency, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here.
Well, US President Joe Biden told world leaders building a clean energy future could create millions of jobs and opportunities around the world.
We know that none of us can escape the worst that's yet to come if we fail to seize this moment. But, ladies and gentlemen, within the growing catastrophe, I believe there's an incredible opportunity, not just for the United States, but for all of us. We're standing at an inflection point in world history.
Well, away from COP26, a train driver involved in the Salisbury crash on Sunday is, we're told, suffering from life-changing injuries. British Transport Police have said there's no evidence the train struck an object before the crash. They confirmed there had been no fatalities, but 13 people have been taken to hospital for their injuries. National Rail Inquiries says disruption following the crash will continue for several days. The Managing Director of Great Western Railways, Mark Hopwood, admits investigators are still trying to work out what went wrong.
It's too early to speculate. Of course, safety is something we take tremendously seriously on the railway, and many of our passengers and customers know that the railway is an exceptionally safe form of travel, and in the UK we have one of the safest railways in Europe. But events like this clearly serve potentially to undermine that. So we want to understand what's happened, why, and learn lessons.
The UK could take legal action if the French don't back down over the post-Brexit fishing row, according to the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. The dispute comes after UK and Jersey authorities declined licences for French boats, arguing permission can only be given to those with a history of fishing on British waters. President Macron warned yesterday France will introduce more stringent port and border checks on UK boats and lorries from Tuesday, that's tomorrow, unless Britain eases this dispute. Liz Truss called the threats unreasonable, suggesting the hardline stance might be because of the upcoming French election. Ireland's Taoiseach Michael Martin told reporters in Glasgow that he stands in solidarity with the French over the fallout.
I believe the European Union and the UK government need to engage constructively on a whole range of issues, not least fisheries. And there is a concern that the UK government has not engaged in a constructive manner on quite a number of files. But I believe that there's discussions on the way between the UK government and the French government, and that they may be in a position to get that issue resolved. But we would, again, given our own situation, we would like to see that resolved.
The chief executive of Barclays Bank, Jess Staley, is stepping down from his role after a probe into his links with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Barclays said they'd been made aware of some of the information into the investigation and were said to be disappointed, but they didn't provide details. The Financial Conduct Authority report makes no findings that Mr. Staley saw or was aware of any of Mr. Epstein's alleged crimes. Now, if you've had 2 jabs of the COVID vaccine and they were over 6 months ago, as of today, you don't need an appointment for your booster jab. The 3rd injection is now being offered at walk-in vaccination centres, the NHS aiming to increase jab uptake ahead of what they've described as challenging winter months ahead. NHS England says that more than 6 million people in the UK have already had their booster jab. You're up to date. Now back to the afternoon agenda with Alex.
Welcome to the afternoon agenda. The post-war generation, born in an era where an appetite for life following 2 global conflicts saw a burst in both homemaking and opportunity. Children of the greatest generation became parents of millennials, and a demographic often coming under fire in the West for being the architects of many modern-day problems, from consumerism to the global financial crisis, wealth gaps and outdated ideologies, and of course by those on the other side of the fence accused of being the cause of Brexit. They're also the generation living longer than ever before and, as a result, demanding ballooning funds for their elderly care while being homeowners, with a fifth of them in houses worth £1 million. For a long time, this generation has also been the focus of politicians mindful of the might of the grey vote, with promises, perhaps soon to be ditched, for triple locks on pensions, free bus passes, winter fuel credits and free TV licences. Another privilege set to be binned. So is the dumping of pensioner perks fully justified, while those scraping by on a minimum wage will be taxed to stop retired oldies from having to sell their leafy homesteads to afford dignity in their older age, paid for by someone else's kid, perhaps unable to get on the housing ladder? Nothing is ever that simple. But is there a generational wealth gap? or just an ever-broadening gulf between the haves and the have-nots? And how do we manage an ageing population propped up by a squeezed middle? Surely, after having paid into the system for most of their lives, without the luxury of working from home and the mod-cons of the 21st century, having funded kids through university at escalating costs, having seen their retirement age continuously put up before finally reaching the point at which they can down tools and buy a caravan, it's only right they get what they were promised. Or do we need a rethink? Boomers have 10 times more wealth than their successors, a gap 4 times bigger than previous generations. In the UK, people in their 30s have lower incomes than those born a decade before, something that hasn't actually happened since the 1930s. The trajectory of exceptional growth after World War II brought rising prosperity, but this pattern started to diverge in the 1970s, and even more markedly so at the turn of the century. Come 2008, the global financial crash led to wage stagnation at exactly the moment salaries for those hitting their 20s normally rapidly rise. 2 assets, pensions and homes, became extremely hard to obtain in a lending world broken by the excesses of previous decades, leaving a future doomsday for a generation without security, simultaneously expected to pay to protect exactly those assets of their seniors. In fact, the over 60s are the only age group to become better off since the crash. Meanwhile, changes to welfare policy have exacerbated the divide. Working age and child benefits have fallen, while pensioners' benefits persisted and even grew. Perhaps to add insult to injury, the pandemic then exposed what can feel like massive inequality even further, with young people in insecure employment, shared and cramped accommodation, and dependent on freedom governing their social lives, were forced to lose livelihoods, lifestyles, and be locked up in pokey apartments to protect their elders, despite facing an almost immeasurably low risk themselves. Yet, the same so-called kidults will likely benefit from bequeathments. They flew the nest later, they remained dependent on the bank of mum and dad, and were purportedly mollycoddled more than any generation before, and have access to a rapidly advancing world of innovations their parents can easily feel excluded from. Today, we need to talk about boomers. Well, let's get going with my first guest, the journalist and campaigner, Dame Esther Ranson. Esther, lovely to have you on. Do you think that there's an increasing generational wealth gap that needs to be addressed, or is this a sort of fiction that's being created, pitting one generation against the next?
Here's the thing about little old people like me, and I feel I'm here under false pretenses because, sadly, I'm too old to be a boomer because I was born in 1940, not at the beginning of the war, not at the end of the war. But the thing about my generation and your generation is that it's very difficult to generalize. There are rich older people. There are loads of older people who are not at all rich and who depend upon their pensions and also the assets in their homes to look after them in older age, because it can be very, very expensive to be looked after. I mean, I recently opened a lovely local nursing home for people with dementia, but I was told that it would cost $90,000 a year to be looked after there. That's a heck of a lot of money. And the last thing I want to do is to cause my children anxiety. My mum, bless her heart, had enough savings to look after herself until she died. I want my children, and I have occasionally, I don't want to humiliate them by saying so, but occasionally been part of the bank of mum and dad myself, but I want them to be confident that the asset that you can see here in my country cottage will, in the end, pay for my care if I need it.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because it's interesting. Like, there's a big debate going on whether increasing national insurance was the right way to go about affording social care, given that people who probably demand the most social care are those in the ageing population, and that they're not paying into this. And by and large, you know, even the sort of lowest paid pay national insurance, people who might really struggle to get on the housing ladder are essentially going to be paying a tax to try and prevent a situation where somebody with an asset like a house has to sell it to afford care. Do you think that's the right way of going about things, or do you think actually those, you know, boomers might have to suck it up and realise that their houses might need to be cashed in to make sure they have dignity in their older age?
I think they already know that. I mean, I think you're only entitled to free care if you have assets below a certain threshold. And I think having a cottage like this means that I would have to pay for myself. And actually, I think rightly, because I don't think I have a God-given right to pass on this cottage to my children without ever having to pay a penny for my care. But, you know, life gets quite tough as you get older. They say old age is not for wimps, or as Betty Davis said, not for sissies. And I have a friend who is literally imprisoned in her home, imprisoned by agoraphobia because she can't get out and about. And since November 2018, she has had 72 different carers. She never knows quite when they're going to arrive. They help her first thing in the morning. They help her last thing at night. Their visits last 10 minutes. And she's completely isolated. And I don't think we want that for our older people. I don't think we want an older generation that suffers from poverty of whatever kind, fuel poverty, having to choose between heating and eating, or having to live in appalling circumstances because they can't afford to be looked after properly.
Do you think we actually live in a society now in the 21st century where old people are sort of thrown onto the scrap heap a little bit or become invisible, and that perhaps as a culture we should be looking at families trying to bring their parents as they get elderly back into the family home? Or do you think that actually enough has changed in the 21st century and old people should have the dignity of being able to live alone?
Well, there are different circumstances that suit different families. I sometimes try and visualize what would happen if my mother came to live with my late husband and me, and I think there would be warfare quite soon because they were both quite positive temperaments, and I'm not sure they would have lived happily under the same roof. So I do think the ability to be able to hang on to your independence is important, but I also think that working on into older age, if you have your strength and your health, is a really good thing. When you were looking at COP26, I was really interested to see references to Sir David Attenborough, who is not in the first flush of youth, to Joe Biden, who is not a teenager. Sadly, the Queen can't be there, but we know she's working on and is quite determined to work on. So I think we need to think of our older people as a resource and to use them. I do know from my own experience that in the voluntary sector, in charities, all these major charities would fall to bits if there weren't older people funding them, working for them, delivering the service. Something like 60% of childlines counsellors are over 65.
And do you think relations between the generations have deteriorated? I mean, there are phrases today like "OK, boomer." Do you think that sort of language is acceptable? Do you think there is a tension now between grandparents, parents and children that didn't used to exist? Or is this just something that happens every era, that older folk look at younger people and, you know, are up in arms about their trends and their habits, and the reverse is true?
I think Socrates grumbled about the behaviour of young people. I think there is a thing that happens to you as you get older when you look with wonder at the people who are young and wonder quite why they do the things they do. Certainly watching Love Island, I must say, that strikes me. I don't watch it a lot. But I do think it's unhelpful to build the generation gap into a brick wall, because we do need each other and we do get on rather well normally. And certainly I find life with my children and my grandchildren is where my real happiness lies. So I'm hoping that we will continue to get a great deal of pleasure out of each other's existence and continue to help each other, because we need each other.
Very wise words indeed. It's been an utter privilege to have you on. You're still an inspiration and as gorgeous as ever. Esther, thank you so much. Well, let's talk housing now with property expert Russell Quirk. Russell, when it comes to the discussion about, our parents had it all and they've really messed things up for the millennials, the one area that's constantly focused on is property and the fact that so many people now struggle to get on the housing ladder. Is there a generational divide that we need to address and how should we address it?
I think that the reality is that, yes, of course, older people own vast majority of equity actually in housing. In fact, 46% of housing equity is owned by over 65. So that's a huge proportion of all housing equity, about £1.7 trillion. But of course, the argument, in my view, surely has to be that those that are now older have worked for it. They've not only worked hard and toiled and put money away, but they've also been taxed, and not just taxed from an income perspective and from a national insurance perspective, but of course they've also been taxed on goodness knows what else where property is concerned, not least the spectre, dare I say, of stamp duty, which of course after the stamp duty holiday now, Alex, has returned to normal. So, let's not forget, when you talk about the fact that, yes, lots of elderly people own properties that are more valuable because they've owned them for a longer time and because they've worked for them, that the stamp duty to buy an expensive property, so let's say something over £1.5 million, the Exchequer receives up to 17% stamp duty levy on that purchase. So I think undoubtedly, yes, whilst it could be seen as an imbalance, it's simply the fact that those that are older have worked, have accumulated, and have paid into the system. And frankly, I don't see why the elderly should have to pay twice for social care when they've spent their entire 45 to 50-year career paying into a system to fund exactly that.
What's behind the fact that young people are really struggling to get on the housing ladder? Is it as simple as the fact that, after the financial crisis, previously there were mortgages offered with 0% and, no need to pay a deposit, 5% at the max, and it's actually that's creating the problem?
I'm not sure that young people are struggling, honestly. So when you look at the proportion of purchases now that are from first-time buyers, it's about 30% of all purchases are those by first-time buyers. And that's one of the highest levels that we've seen for decades. And a lot of that, of course, is because, as you rightly referenced in your monologue at the beginning, the Bank of Mum and Dad. Now, the Bank of Mum and Dad, of course, the trickle down from all that wealth we're talking about in older people's homes, if the Bank of Mum and Dad actually were an actual bank, it would be one of the top 10 lenders in the country. In other words, if it were a bank, it literally would be one of the top 10 banks in the UK. So look, it's not so hard, particularly when you look at the level of interest rates and the fact that a mortgage for a first-time buyer in terms of the repayment is the lowest it has ever been. Arguably about to increase, of course, because we're about to see rate increases that obviously will affect the mortgage market. And of course, there's been a whole plethora of support from the government. The government very, very keen to turn everybody into a homeowner because homeowners are more likely to vote Conservative, apparently. So hence we've seen Help to Buy. We've now got the Boris mortgage, which means that as a buyer, first-time buyer under most circumstances, you only need a 5% deposit. So I'm not sure it is true that it's difficult for the youngsters of today to get on the first rung of the housing ladder. It doesn't seem that the data supports that contention, frankly.
Russell, thank you so much. And thank you for the little statistic there. The Bank of Mum and Dad, one of the top, or in the top 10 lenders in the country. Fascinating. Really interesting to have you on. I'm joined now by the educational consultant and former head teacher, Adam Peter Lang. Adam, do you think this generation of youngsters will be left with a huge educational deficit if we don't pay more attention to and invest more money in their education post-COVID?
Well, I agree with you. I'm slightly at variance with your two previous speakers, actually, because I'm a member of the Silver Generation and I think we've had it good. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be ignored, but I do think we need to focus, coming out of the pandemic, on the young people. They've had a terrible time in their education at primary level, secondary level, college level, all those vocational courses, and at university. We need to support them moving forward. And I think at one point, when the furlough scheme was introduced, the highest proportion of people on the furlough scheme were the 18 to 26-year-olds, because a lot of young people going into the pandemic had hospitality jobs, jobs in other areas which weren't necessarily well paid. So I think we owe it to that generation to look after them coming out of the pandemic. So I think there isn't a generational divide as such, but I think we ought to be very careful that we don't forget about them. And there wasn't much about young people in the budget recently. And I mean, we're talking today, aren't we, of the conference in Glasgow, and look at the voice of young people there in a positive way, in a very positive way, about the concerns they have for the future. So I think we need to prioritise young people more than we are doing at the moment.
And how should we begin that process? I mean, there's an argument that actually today far more young people are going to university than their parents, except the difference may be that they are ending up with masses of debt, where those who were privileged enough to go to university, 30, 40 years ago, often didn't have to pay.
Well, no, that's a very good point. I mean, actually, I think in 2012, there was a peak in the birth rate in this country, and we're seeing that play through with young people. And I think I read a figure somewhere, the number of 16 to 18-year-olds is going to increase by about 15% at the moment. So, yes, you're right. I think it's 40% increase in applications to universities at the moment. And you could argue that's a good thing. You might argue that people are doing that because they don't know what the future looks like. But yes, we need to think carefully about that. But yeah, young people are coming out saddled with enormous debt from that. And that's another issue that I think we need to come back and consider.
Year on year, we see exam results being inflated, so people say, or at least improving. But do you think there is a difference in standard of education between the sort of education young people are having today, let's say especially around the 3 Rs, to that which perhaps their parents received?
Well, education changes. It's changed all around the world, and it continues to change. And there are certain intrinsic sort of bedrock of it and other things that need to move on. I think that it's very difficult to look at standards over the last couple of years with the pandemic. I mean, you think of the amount of time that a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old has missed from school and even from university. And by the way, I've gone back part-time to study at university, so I'm seeing it from the other side after all these years doing with my other work. And the university students have had a terrible time in terms of provision during the pandemic. So I think we need to come out of this. We need to sort of shake ourselves down. But I do think we need to, as I said earlier, prioritise the young. Was it Kevin Collins? He was the czar for raising achievement. He wanted £15 billion put to education, and he left because he wasn't given that. And I think he commented last week on the budget saying that still wasn't enough to play catch up and to rectify these terrible problems that have happened. Young people are very resilient. What was it? Youth is wasted on the young. We had a quote from Esther earlier on. I think Oscar Wilde said that. I don't totally agree with that, but I think that we owe it to our younger generations to prioritise them more. And I think parents, grandparents actually would agree with that too.
Adam, it's been fascinating talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on. Adam Peter Lang, education consultant. And what a range of views we've already had. Esther Ranson saying she'd expect to have to sell her house to pay for her care. Russell Quirk saying, why on earth should she have to? And Adam there saying we are not actually doing enough to prioritise young people. We're going to be continuing this conversation throughout the show. And of course, as per usual, I really want to know what you think. So do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet me @gbnews. And we're asking, are we penalising the young too much to pay for the elderly? I know, contentious one, but do make sure you cast your vote. Listen to all the interviews on the show. Give it some thought. Now, after the break, we're heading to Glasgow, where world leaders have gathered for the COP26 Climate Summit, and we'll be asking what can realistically be achieved this week. See you shortly.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. The Prime Minister has issued an urgent warning to world leaders on climate change, saying it's 1 minute to midnight and we need to act now. Boris Johnson was delivering a speech at the United Nations COP26 summit in Glasgow. Historic decisions are set to be made at the conference to tackle what's being called a climate crisis.
The longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act, because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is live at the COP26 summit in Glasgow and joins me now. Darren, it's been a big day for keynote speeches, a lot of familiar faces popping up on the stage.
Yeah, indeed, we've heard from a whole range of world leaders and indeed notable, what do you call them, celebrities? Well, you could to a degree, people like Greta Thunberg and also Prince Charles today as well. This is essentially the first proper day of COP26, that climate change conference that we've been talking about for the last couple of months, but it's finally started here in Glasgow. Tens of thousands of people have arrived over the weekend from all different parts of the world, from 200 different countries. Today, there are none less than 120 world leaders here, everyone from Saudi Arabia to Denmark to the United States and Indonesia, and they're all trying to at least assert that they want to see some significant progress made over the next 2 weeks here in Glasgow to try and keep those aspirations of Paris, that Paris Climate Accord from 2015 alive. And that aspiration was to try and cap global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. Now we're already at 1.2 degrees for pre-industrial times, so that's why the Prime Minister and others are insisting that this really is the moment of truth, that time is short, that action is needed now. And those words, you're right, were echoed by everyone from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, to Joe Biden, the US president, as well. We heard from Prince Charles saying that this cannot just be the effort of governments or indeed even of individuals, that the private sector, corporations, really need to step up as well. That fundamentally, Alex, and the Prime Minister said this yesterday in Rome, largely this boils down to money. Can essentially those that want to see these changes when it comes to tackling climate change, can they raise enough money to convince those that are slightly more sceptical? And then outside of this conference centre, Greta Thunberg is addressing supporters at a park here in Glasgow, arguing again that politicians simply need to stop talking and need to act on all of this.
Singing in harmony or singing off the same hymn sheet at least. But have there been anybody who's sort of diverted from the main aim of this conference and actually sort of put up a defence for their nation, saying, well, you know, it's all very well, but these targets are not necessarily achievable?
Well, I think it's notable, first of all, in saying that not everyone's on the same hymn sheet by saying who is not here. We know that President Xi of China is not here, Vladimir Putin is not here, Bolsonaro of Brazil is not here. They are some of the world's biggest climate emitters. We also know that President Erdogan of Turkey pulled out at the last minute as well. So there is a sign that, you know, not every country is as convinced as particularly Western Europe and the United States are on the urgency to tackle all of this. Where is the difference? I think in many ways it's actually not about the long-term aim. I think even the Chinese and the Indians and elsewhere do know that climate change is happening, that it does pose a pretty significant threat to certain parts of the world. But it comes down to this argument about money. They would say that actually what we need is assistance in all of this, that we're not quite as wealthy as you guys are in the West, and that if you want this to happen, we need some financial assistance. Now, the government here in the UK have been trying to work towards this target of raising $100 billion this year, or a target of $100 billion as part of a financial assistance package to help those in the developing world try and mitigate some of the worst aspects of climate change. But that is not now going to be reached. In fact, that target has been pushed back until 2023. So you're right in saying, I think, not everyone is on the same page in terms of the detail about how we get there, though I think there is probably a pretty large global consensus that this is a long-term issue that does need to be tackled. It's just how immediate and what kind of aspects and preparations countries need to make now in order to mitigate those long-term effects. That's why Boris Johnson in his speech was suggesting that the longer we leave it, the greater the kind of implications is for all of us, that the greater effort we'd have to put in the longer we let it run.
Darren, thanks ever so much for the update. Speaking to you again in the next hour, I believe, so don't go anywhere. Now, after the break, what is the purpose of Girl Guiding? Well, the organisation is facing criticism over social media posts promoting asexuality, while concerned parents say it should stick to its traditional activities. First, let's get a roundup of the news headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Polly Middlehurst and here are your latest news headlines at 4:30. As you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has urged world leaders to take action on climate change, telling them it's 1 minute to midnight, and if they don't get serious now, it'll be too late for our children tomorrow. The Prime Minister was speaking on the opening day of the COP26 Climate Summit, which is being held in Glasgow. Around 120 heads of state and government leaders saw the speech, including the US President Joe Biden, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. A train driver involved in the Salisbury crash on Sunday is suffering from life-changing injuries. British Transport Police confirmed there were no fatalities, but 13 people were taken to hospital. They say there's no evidence the train struck an object just before the crash. National Rail inquiries say disruption following the crash will continue for some days. The UK could take legal action if the French don't back down over the post-Brexit fishing row. The dispute comes after UK and Jersey authorities denied licences to small French boats last month. President Macron warned France will introduce more stringent port and border checks on the UK if it doesn't ease the dispute soon. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said, though, that the threats are unreasonable, suggesting the hardline stance may be because of the French election, which is upcoming. And if you've had 2 jabs of the COVID vaccine, and they were over 6 months ago, as from today, you don't need an appointment for your booster jab. That 3rd injection is now being offered at walk-in vaccination centres, with the NHS aiming to increase jab uptake ahead of what they're describing as a few challenging winter months ahead. That's it from me for now. I'll be back at 5 o'clock. Now back to Alex.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. Now, UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has warned France it has 48 hours to withdraw its threats over fishing licences, which will see Britain begin dispute talks over a Brexit deal. French officials have said they will stop UK fishing boats from some ports and tighten customs on lorries entering the country unless more licences are granted for their small boats to fish in Britain's waters. Well, former Chief Immigration Officer for the UK Border Force at Calais from 2001 until 2005, Kevin Saunders, joins me now. Kevin, if the French are true to their word and they start playing games at the borders, is that going to lead to a massive Christmas crisis?
It will certainly lead to queues at the borders, but I would take what the French are saying with a pinch of salt, because if they decide to get difficult over customs controls in Calais, Dunkirk and Coquelles, they are going to have massive queues on the French motorways, and that is something that the French do not want.
Has this sort of thing happened before? We've, had a few spats and spiffs with France over the decades, but have we ever actually sort of come to blows like this before?
Oh, yeah, frequently. The French fishermen used to blockade Calais regularly. Anything they didn't like, they'll blockade Calais. The French farmers would come along and burn tyres on the motorway just outside the port to block it. It's something the French have got a degree in, blocking Calais. They're very good at it.
And, how much damage, when they do things like that, we all know the French love burning a good tyre, don't they? But when they do decide to get all very Gallic in reaction to something they don't like, how much mayhem does it cause us? And are there other ways to divert the mayhem, perhaps, like looking at different routes?
Not really. Dover-Calais takes most of the traffic coming to the UK because it's a very quick transit, similarly with the Channel Tunnel and Dunkirk. In fact, you could divert more traffic to Dunkirk, but that would mean more sailings from Dunkirk. And whether DFDS can actually do that, I don't really know. So if they do decide to blockade Calais, it will be a problem. But realistically, it'll be a problem for the French as well, which they don't want. After all, Mr. Macron wants a quick win here. He doesn't want a long, drawn-out dispute.
I mean, what sort of burden does Calais carry when it comes to goods entering the UK? It's a lion's share, isn't it?
Oh yes, Calais does take a massive amount of traffic, and even more now. It's taking a lot more traffic. I know from speaking to ex-colleagues there that Border Force are opening more lanes to deal with the increased amount of traffic that is coming to the UK.
And in terms of when the French are doing their checks, there's been some gossip about the idea that customs officials are going to be told, well, check more vehicles than normal, slow things down a bit, agitate the situation. But a lot of those checks actually take place on UK soil. Is there anything we could do if that sort of mischief-making happens?
The French customs authority, the douane, actually carry out a check in Calais. Now, they can look at all the paperwork twice, 3 times, 4 times. They can slow it up as much as they like. But the douane don't like doing that because the knock-on effect is huge queues. And really, the French do not want huge queues at the tunnel or at Calais. They get very, very upset when lorries are queuing back onto the motorway. So I don't think this is one that is going to happen.
Kevin, thanks for your reassurance. We do all know, of course, that the French might not be as skilled in the art of queuing as their wonderful neighbours in Britain. Let's see how this one pans out. Kevin Saunders, who's the former Chief Immigration Officer for the UK Border Force at Calais, knows a thing or two about Calais. Now, Girl Guiding, which runs activity groups for girls aged between 10 and 14, has been criticised for social media posts on asexuality awareness. The Twitter account of the charity shared a post stating, "This week is #Ace Week, a time to raise awareness and understanding of the asexual community. So here's a shout out to all of our asexual volunteers and members. Thank you for everything you do in Girl Guiding." But parents and safeguarding organisations say that Girl Guiding should be focusing on activities and building camaraderie rather than focusing on girls' sexuality. We asked Girl Guiding for an interview, of course we did, but they didn't respond to our request. Of course they didn't. In a statement given to the Times newspaper, Girl Guiding said that a consultation of members urged the organisation to become more inclusive. They added, in response, we launched our new diversity and inclusion strategic plan to make Girl Guiding a place where everyone feels welcomed, like they belong, and free to be themselves, whoever they are and wherever they are from. We represent nearly 400,000 people across the UK, and it's important that we reflect the diverse range of voices within society. We welcome constructive criticism to help shape our organisation and ensure that we can support and welcome all girls and young women as we continue our journey. Well, it's a relief at least that they use the word girls and women, huh? Let's speak now to Tanya Carter from Safe Schools Alliance, a national campaign of parents, teachers, governors and other professionals working to uphold safeguarding. What's wrong with the Girl Guiding tweets in your view? We've lost Tanya there. We're going to see if we can get that connection back. But in the meantime, today on the afternoon agenda, we're causing some controversy. We're talking about boomers. Is that you? Are we penalising the young too much to pay for the elderly? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Jane says most elderly, unless they're on benefits, pay for themselves and help their children and grandchildren to get on the housing ladder. They've paid taxes for decades. It's rare, unless they fall on hard times, that the young pay for them. Sally says many of the elderly have paid their entire life into pensions and the NHS via their taxes, paid to secure a protected retirement in case of need. They're not responsible for bad decisions made by politicians. Jessie says pensioners complaining to me that their pensions aren't enough, ignoring the fact that the young are funding their retirement by paying even more tax than they ever did. Yet the young will get less when they retire. Peter says when the elderly were young, they had to pay what they were told to. Teresa says the young have always been penalised, but in the end it works out because most of us get old and get the end benefit. When we were young, we didn't question it, but years of parents treating children as special has given them a sense of entitlement. Well, after the break, Kellogg's promises female staff more support with leave for fertility treatment, miscarriage and menopause. But if employers don't address childcare, are they really supporting women at all. First, it's the weather.
Hello again. It's another blustery day out there, but through the next 24 hours, that wind will ease somewhat. It's still bringing further showers to many parts of the UK, but away from the showers, sunny spells, and we'll see more of that sort of thing during the next few days as this low moves away. It is slowly moving away, but it is still bringing fairly tightly packed isobars there in the north and gales around northern and northeastern shores of Scotland, along with some persistent rain for northwest Scotland. Showers elsewhere, mainly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western England and Wales. But you can see Midlands, East Anglia, southeast, seeing plenty of clear skies overnight. And here, winds will fall away, so a touch of frost in places as we start off the day tomorrow, and a few mist patches. Once any mist patches lift, actually plenty of bright weather around first thing. Long spells of sunshine for many away from northern and western coasts where there will still be further showers coming through. And then into the afternoon, some showers will develop elsewhere. Just about anywhere could see a shower, but they'll be well scattered, they'll be fleeting. And away from the showers, plenty of sunny skies. With light winds, not feeling too bad. Temperatures reaching 11 or 12 Celsius. But that wind is on the cold side and it will push further showers into the north and the west on Tuesday night. Increasingly, a few showers will come in via the North Sea to affect parts of eastern Scotland, northeast England at times through the night. Away from the areas of cloud and showers, clear spells once again, however, and Wednesday begins on a chilly note with a touch of frost in places. But again, despite the chill, actually plenty of sunshine around first thing Wednesday. And on the whole, I think inland, fewer showers to come on Wednesday. Showers mostly affecting coastal areas. Similar again on Thursday, showers tending to ease inland, plenty of sunshine around, and then turning milder later this week.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there. My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. Now, a major UK manufacturer is to offer paid leave for female staff going through fertility treatment, those who've experienced miscarriage and women going through the menopause. Cereals brand Kellogg's says a package of new measures will benefit workers in factories at Trafford and Wrexham and staff based at its headquarters in Salford. So how big an impact do these health issues have on a woman's ability to work? Well, I'm joined now by hormone specialist Dr. Martin Kinsella, who treats women dealing with the menopause on a daily basis. Martin, great to have you back on. Do you think that this is long overdue? Finally, a workplace acknowledging some of the horrors that women go through as a result of our crazy hormones?
Yeah, I definitely think it's encouraging. It's certainly a step in the right direction. If you just look at some of the statistics out there now, in the UK, we've got 13 million women suffering with menopause or perimenopausal symptoms, and a huge number of those are having mental health issues. So I think something like half of them will complain that they'll have depression. A quarter of them will have severe debilitating symptoms. 30% will have anxiety. That's a huge number of people that could be potentially presenting or either not seeing a doctor, not getting help, or going to the doctors and actually being given things like antidepressants or something, when actually the root cause of it is the menopause. And it's well known that the problems, this huge number of menopausal women who are having behavioral problems and problems with their mood and cognition, for them to get that sort of recognition and help, I think is a really positive step in the right direction anyway. And the menopause, remember, isn't over a couple of years. It's actually over a long period of time. So it'll be interesting to see what the actual specifics that Kellogg's will be doing for them in the future.
I mean, there will be people out there who say that some women really suffer terribly every single month from their period. Should we also be potentially encouraging workplaces to allow women to phone up and say, I'm really not managing this month, can I have some time off?
Well, it's a difficult one, but I think that there should be someone, I think there needs to be more recognition that this is a serious problem. I think it affects women far more than I think in the past we've been led to believe or as sinners. It's a real issue for lots of women from between the ages of certainly in the 40s up until, and this can go on, like I said, for 15 years. It can go on till patients in the 60s can still be having debilitating symptoms. And definitely huge proportion of them all have mood problems from anxiety, irritability, depression, so on. And as I said, 25%, it's very severe.
It's interesting to see as well that Kellogg seems to be taking an interest in fertility and offering women paid leave if they're having fertility treatments or indeed have gone through the tragedy of a miscarriage. Do you think that's something else other firms should be looking to replicate?
It's difficult for me to comment on that. I mean, my area of expertise usually is with hormonal changes for women in the perimenopause and menopause. Certainly having a miscarriage it can be traumatic for women. It can be, there can also be, like with any post-pregnancy, there are hormonal changes. It takes a long time for hormones to actually start to regulate. So lots of people who've had, especially when they've had multiple children, can find that their hormones don't recover quite so well after maybe the last child. And we have to allow that period of time for 6 to 12 months. It can take, cycles need to regulate, the hormones need to come back in balance. So, but it's where you draw the line at the end of the day. It's where it's difficult. But I think definitely the perimenopause and menopause are certainly areas where there needs to be more recognition and some support for women going through that change.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we've suddenly hit a point where people are finally talking about this, albeit not very loudly. I mean, I'm assuming you're very pleased that there are people now talking about menopause very openly. But why on earth has it taken us so long when 50% of the population go through this process? Why are most of us sort of deaf, dumb and blind about the suffering that they have to endure?
Well, I think it's because over the years and historically, it's always been seen as just a natural process that happens. And I think that lots of problems that we see that are caused by hormonal changes in the bodies have been sort of just labeled as other things. And I think now, as we're starting to get a little bit more, we're starting to care more now about our health and nutrition. We're living, you've got to remember now that we're living a lot longer. So the average life expectancy is 80. That's going to increase. There are children born today that could potentially live till far, far longer than this. And we're going to see lots of advances in modern medicine. As this all improves, remember that, you know, the female body is only designed to reproduce up to sort of the 40s to 50s. So once you start to lose your hormones, the body starts to decline. So if we're gonna extend our lifespan, if you like, and we're going to extend it for so long past our reproductive years, then by not addressing the changes in the hormones, or certainly acknowledging and trying to treat the effects that that having reduced hormones or imbalanced hormones has on our body, then we're not going to have that quality of life. And I think, you know, we're a lot younger now, aren't we? So, you know, people in the 40s and 50, you know, when you're 50 is not old now, but to be then hit with, you know, debilitating symptoms. And people have, you know, pressure in the workplace. They might have, you know, jobs that demand them to be on the game all the time. They might have. We live very busy lives with children, very busy social lives. You know, we've changed a lot now. So I think for us to have these problems, I think certainly becoming more in the forefront of our minds.
Martin, thank you so much for coming on the programme again. Always great to talk to you. Dr. Martin Kinsella, who's a hormone specialist, fighting the fight on behalf of all the women out there going through menopause. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda. Lots more still to come, so don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined The Afternoon Agenda on GB News, I'm Alex Phillips and we're just about to turn 5 o'clock. This show isn't news as you know it, but discussion and debate about things that are or perhaps should be on your agenda. Still to come this afternoon. Political posturing at the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. But what will world leaders actually achieve this week? We'll have reaction and analysis live from COP26. Now, should the Scottish Church say sorry for the executions of thousands of people accused of witchcraft more than 400 years ago? What's going on there? With an apology on the cards, why is this happening now? And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about boomers. Are the young being penalised too much to pay for the elderly? Well, that's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, here's the news headlines with the wonderful Polly.
Thank you, Alex. Your headlines at 5 o'clock. Boris Johnson has urged the world's leaders to take action on climate change, telling them it's now 1 minute to midnight. The Prime Minister was speaking on the opening day of COP26, the climate summit in Glasgow. Around 120 heads of state and government saw the speech, including the US President Joe Biden, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Boris Johnson said our children would pay the price of their inaction.
The longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act. Because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Well, the environmentalist David Attenborough is also at COP26. He also told delegates the time for action is now.
In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellencies, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here.
Well, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told world leaders at COP26 a pollution tax would help push down global emissions.
I call on other countries to do the same. Just as globally we've agreed to a minimum corporate tax, we must work together to ensure it is no longer free to pollute anywhere in the world.
Well, away from COP26, a train driver involved in the Salisbury crash on Sunday is said to be suffering from life-changing injuries. British Transport Police have said there's no evidence the train struck an object just before the crash. They confirmed there were no fatalities, but confirmed 13 people were taken to hospital for their injuries. National rail inquiries say disruption following the crash will continue for several days. The UK could take legal action if the French don't back down over the post-Brexit fishing row, according to the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. The dispute comes after UK and Jersey authorities denied licences to French boats, arguing permission can only be given to those with a history of fishing in British waters. President Macron, meanwhile, has warned France will introduce more stringent port and border checks from Tuesday unless Britain eases the dispute. Liz Truss called the threats unreasonable, suggesting the hardline stance might be because of the upcoming French election. Ireland's Taoiseach Michael Martin told reporters in Glasgow that he stands in solidarity with France over the fallout.
There's a concern that the UK government has not engaged in a constructive manner on quite a number of files. But I believe that there's discussions on the way between the UK government and the French government, and that they may be in a position to get that issue resolved. But we would, again, given our own situation, we would like to see that resolved.
The chief executive of Barclays Bank, Jess Staley, is due to step down from his role after a probe into his links with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Barclays said they were made aware of some information into the investigation and were disappointed but didn't provide details. The Financial Conduct Authority report makes no findings that Mr. Staley saw or was aware of any of Mr. Epstein's alleged crimes. That's it from me for now. I'll be back soon.
Hello, you're with the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, and we're talking about baby boomers. So is it time boomers coughed up for millennials? My esteemed colleague Tom Harwood pithily tweeted the other day, if you're someone in the UK with a decent job who happens to not have been gifted property, you can now expect the state to take half your cash and your landlord to take half of what's left. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with him. Government policy to whack up national insurance paid by the lowest earners, not retired people, to cover the rising cost of social care, largely due to an ageing population, invoked outcry from some parts of the commentariat, yet arguably not as much as whether the triple lock on pensions should be binned. But does it really have to be one generation versus the next? Are politicians creating a ticking time bomb of assetless, disconnected and abandoned youngsters at the altar of the boomer vote? Or is it only a matter of time before the disparity is corrected? Are millennials justified in feeling peeved that their parents had it better? Or is the opposite perhaps true? Oh, it's a spicy debate. We like that here. And one that has become louder today than in any bygone era. So let's get to the bottom of it. Well, my first guest this hour is leading pensions expert and Conservative peer Baroness Ros Altman. Baroness Altman, it's wonderful to have you on. Talking about pensions, is it absolutely right that the government maintained the triple lock, but in the aftermath of the pandemic, could they be forgiven for, say, bringing it back down to a double lock?
Well, if they were going to drop any bit of the triple lock, it shouldn't be the earnings link, which is the most important. And let's face it, the reason they're dropping it is because they don't like the number. Now, instead of adjusting the number for the effects of the pandemic, which would bring it down anyway, they're telling pensioners, sorry, we made a commitment in the manifesto in 2019 that we would protect you and make sure that you were not exposed unfairly to the rises in the cost of living and developments in the economy. But here we are 2 years later, and that commitment has been completely torn up. And we in the House of Lords tomorrow are mounting an effort to try to help the government see that what it's planning to do is wrong. And it's not because we think, oh, all pensioners are well off and they just need a bit more money. That's just not the case. 2 million pensioners are already in poverty. And the reality here is that we are taking away money from pensioners, which will be used to fund cuts in alcohol duty, reductions in the banking surcharge, and we're leaving more and more pensioners exposed to real poverty. Poverty among pensioners was rising before the pandemic. And I completely agree with you that we shouldn't be pitting one generation against another, because that is not how a society functions well. However, if you make a deal with one group in society, it's wrong to suddenly come along and tear it up, especially when we have, for example, the lowest state pension in the developed world. On the point of social care, though, which you mentioned at the beginning, I think it is absolutely wrong that we have introduced an increase in national insurance. There should have been a levy on everybody's income so that everybody pays for something towards social care. At the moment, like you say, people with buy-to-let properties or pensioners with high pension income aren't paying anything towards social care, which they are likely to be the first people to use. So I genuinely think this is a mistake. National insurance is paid more by low earners because it starts at a lower level, and a tax across the board, a contribution towards care, like an insurance premium, but levied on all income, makes a lot more sense to me. Having said that, taking away the protection from pensioners and giving them just a 3.1% rise when the OBR itself says that inflation next year is going to be 4.4% and possibly a lot higher. And the OBR has reported that average earnings were 5% this year. We're going to try and see if we can send this bill back to the Commons so that MPs can think again about whether they really want to break this vital commitment that millions of pensioners have been relying on, and the poorest pensioners are going to struggle with rising costs of living if we proceed with what I think is a very misguided policy.
I mean, when it comes to pensions, do we have a bit of a ticking time bomb when it comes to, say, my generation, the generation below me, who may not have had sort of linear and stable career progression, but moved from job to job and haven't necessarily even started paying into a pension by the time they're even in their 40s? Is that going to create untold issues further down the line?
Well, again, another misconception is that all baby boomers have had steady careers and have got great pensions. It's not true. Until we got auto-enrollment, which didn't come in till about 2012, only about half of the workforce was even covered by an occupational pension. So the idea that all baby boomers have got great pensions is a myth. The idea that they all went to university is a myth. About 10% of baby boomers went to university. Nowadays, a lot more people do. But again, I don't like the idea of pitting one group against another. Society is made up of people who live together and support each other, and there's government that make a deal that people should be able to rely on. And that deal should include how we support the most vulnerable people in society and how we look after the elderly people who've finished their working lives, many of whom are not well off. Yes, of course, the wealthiest baby boomers have done extremely well, but that's only a minority. And yet all the other baby boomers are tarred with the brush of those who live perhaps predominantly down in the south and who a lot of policymakers tend to know. But if you get out and about around the country, there are millions of pensioners who don't have a lot of money, who are struggling to make ends meet, and who have relied on and trusted that when the government says they're going to be protected, that protection will actually come.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Baroness Ros Altman, Conservative peer and pensions expert. It's really great to kick off the first hour with you. Now, Head of Economics at the New Economics Foundation, Lydia Prieg, joins me. Lydia, is there a generational wealth gap, or is this just a case of there are haves and have-nots, and they exist in both boomers and millennials, and actually our focus should be on trying to create more social mobility rather than yelling at pensioners to pay more for their offspring?
So we've definitely got haves and have-nots in our society, but I would definitely agree that the picture is a lot more complicated than a simple generational divide, and it's not really particularly useful to crudely pitch different groups of people against each other. What I would say is we need to ensure that vulnerable people in society are obviously given support and an ability to thrive, and at the same time the costs of that are borne by the people who are best placed to bear those costs. So for example, if you're talking about something like a health and social care levy, very, very valid point that we've just heard about the fact that it needs to be applied to all incomes, so not just people who are currently working, but also to pension incomes. But I would actually go further than that and emphasise that if we want to look at the people with the broader shoulders, we actually need to look at wealth and often focus on wealth as opposed to income, or in fact, income earned from wealth, because currently the rate of tax that you pay on income earned from wealth can be half that you pay on income from regular work. So that is the first place I would go to look at getting a properly funded social care system. I wouldn't look at it in terms of pitching generations against each other.
Guest at the very start of the programme at 4 o'clock was Esther Ranson, and she rather surprised me by saying that she lives in a lovely cottage, but she wouldn't expect her children to worry about her elderly care, as she's more than happy to flog her house to pay for it. Do you think that that's a good attitude? Is that the sort of attitude that people who have established assets should have? Or is it unreasonable, do you think, to expect people who have paid into a mortgage and own their house to then be forced to part with that and not pass it on to their children for the sake of, say, domiciliary care or a care home?
So I would say in the UK, overwhelming public opinion seems to be that when it comes to matters of health, we want to have an insurance-based system where, society as a whole pays in, and if an individual is unfortunate enough to get struck down by a terrible disease, that they don't have to pay for it just because they happen to be unlucky enough to have got that disease. And so, yes, we need to be looking at people who've got wealth, but we need to be applying that to all people, who are in positions where they've got lots of wealth. We don't just want to be going to people who happen to be unlucky enough to have like Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. We don't apply that principle to, say, childbirth or cancer treatment or heart surgery. So I don't see why there's any indication that the British public want to apply that to a different set of illnesses either.
I mean, some research conducted in America has said that baby boomers are 10 times wealthier than millennials, and that gap, the gap between the generations, is 4 times higher than it's ever been in history. Do you, in the New Economics Foundation, see evidence for that and think that it's a societal problem? Or is this something that's naturally going to correct itself over time when perhaps the wealthiest boomers do leave their assets to their children and the money can't be taken with them and so ends up getting back into circulation?
Sure. So a big driver of a lot of the wealth over the past few decades in the UK has been house price inflation. And there's certainly absolutely no indication whatsoever that that's something that the government is going to step in and resolve, so that people who aren't already not on the property market still have a chance to get on the property market, or aren't just excluded from that. So I don't think there's any indication of that either by intervening in the property market itself. And for example, during the crisis, one of the first things Sunak did, obviously, was cut stamp duty. So, I mean, the government have shown their commitments to propping up the continued growth of UK house prices. But I would also say, when it comes to things like inheritance, the government have shown very little appetite for looking at things like, for example, moving to a lifetime gift tax, which would help cut down on lots of the tax avoidance that happens from an inheritance perspective. So it's a very real problem, but I'm not optimistic that the government are going to solve it.
Dr. Lydia Prieg, thank you so much for coming on and talking about that very real problem that certainly a few millennials I know certainly identify with. Joining me now in the studio is Poppy Coburn. Poppy, you said young people are essentially trapped in a state of perpetual adolescence. Is that because they can't do things like get on the housing ladder, that they can't make decisions such as I want to have a child at this time, because there just aren't options out there for them to have it all? They're expected to have a career and they're expected to potentially go on to motherhood, but they can't buy a house. I mean, is that what you mean about, in essence, losing their agency?
I've argued before, I think the main problem in this country is that people misunderstand that the culture war, and by extension the generational war, has a material basis to it. And I think, unfortunately, the Conservative Party has really lost sight of the values set forth by former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who understood the most important principle for sustaining British democracy is home ownership. And this is not just the case for millennials, but also for my generation, which is Generation Z coming up, where unless you are lucky enough to come from a family with a lot of wealth and you're going to stand to inherit that wealth, there is a very, very slim chance you're going to be able to get your foot into a housing ladder, onto the housing ladder. If you're a young graduate, for example, in London, you're probably going to be paying about, on average, 40% of your income on rent, which is already extraordinary, and people have discussed before the renting crisis in London. But really what's outrageous is then, if you're a graduate as well, you can expect to be paying about a 42.5% marginal rate of tax. So not only are we penalising young people for lacking wealth to get on the housing market ladder, we're also making it impossible for them to keep their income. So we're taxing people who want to work hard, young people who are pulling themselves up by the bootstraps, they're not being lazy, and we're making it absolutely impossible for them to then gather that wealth to pass on to their own children. There's a very clear generational divide there, and I really am disappointed in the Conservative government for not having the courage to say, this stops now. We can fix this. We are thinking about the future of the country, not just short-term, what do our voter base want?
Yeah, and is that the problem with this? So the sort of ever-tantalising spectre of the grey vote. I mean, at the end of the day, I think about 78% of them turned out to vote in the last general election, compared to 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds. And so evidently, this is when it comes to voting, a very mobile demographic. Is the problem that parties are constantly chasing that vote, rather than actually listening to the needs of those people who will, in theory, become their voters further down the line?
Absolutely. Again, it's what's so disappointing. Boris Johnson is an extremely popular politician. The Conservative Party looks set to be ruling for the next decade or so if things continue as successfully as they have. They have a perfect opportunity here to go outside of what's popular, but what isn't necessarily good in the long term, and say, we know for the long-term future of the country, not just the country, but their own party, we need to make sure that young people are getting those opportunities, they're getting the money so they can turn that into wealth. And then they can start paying into a system. And I think it's disheartening for me, particularly, knowing that I'm paying so much tax on a social welfare net that I probably won't be able to use. The triple lock on pensions is not going to be there when I retire. This scheme is almost totally unsustainable at this point. Many young people aren't using the NHS because we're young, we're broadly quite healthy. So we're seeing all this money going out in taxation. We're going, hang on, what are we getting for this? We're just paying out the nose, and we can't afford a house, we can't afford to have children, or if we do, we have less children than we want. And we've been penalised for doing what we were told to do at school, which is get a degree, go into a graduate scheme, that's where you make your money. Well, no, that's not great because you're paying a lot of money for that. It's just a very depressing state of affairs. You kind of get the feeling that you're being totally ignored and also patronised.
I mean, I quite agree with you on that. But in terms of when it comes to the assets that boomers might have accrued, and certainly, we were told earlier that Dame Ros Altman said that 2 million pensioners are living in poverty. Is the problem, in a way, the sense that instead of means testing pensioners, they've been treated almost like a special category in their own right and given perks such as winter heating allowance, even if they're millionaires, or free bus passes or free TV licenses? Again, that's set to be scrapped. But is there a problem that actually by sort of demarcating pensioners as a special subsection of society, we've almost fed into this intergenerational battle that is being played out in the sort of interviews I'm conducting today?
Absolutely, and I think it's a real shame because at the end of the day, no young person wants to be taking money from their granny. You know, we don't want to be seen as being selfish. These are real, genuine economic concerns that we have, and it's a shame that we all have to feel like we're scrabbling for that last piece of pie, but it doesn't have to be this way. With some good policy, we could change this, you know, for example, reforming the Planning Act, building more housing. That's a wonderful way to solve the supply crisis. That could burst the housing bubble. But the Tories don't want that to happen because so many of their voters own assets which are always, always, always appreciating in value. Now, that's very short-term thinking, and it's unfortunate that then we get to a state of mind where you've got the elderly saying, oh, I dislike young people, they're all about wokeness, I don't understand what they're saying. You get young people who are totally disconnected from mainstream British society and politics, and so they're turning to quite hateful, far-left ideologies because they feel like they've got no stake in the society they've grown up in. And I do think it is the responsibility of government to step in and say, we've got to fix this. This is a terrible problem, and it's going to blow up in our faces one day, because at the end of the day, we'll get old too. And we won't be voting Tory.
Well said. Quite enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Well, what a fascinating conversation. We're going to be continuing this conversation as well until the end of the show. Do get in touch about everything that you've heard today. I'm going to be fascinated to hear your views as these interviews go on. Now, after the break, we'll be back in Glasgow, where COP26, where our political editor will have analysis of the wheeling and dealing, or should I say a lot of the hot air at the climate summit. But first, here's the weather forecast.
Hello again. It's another blustery day out there, but through the next 24 hours, that wind will ease somewhat. It's still bringing further showers to many parts of the UK, but away from the showers, sunny spells, and we'll see more of that sort of thing during the next few days as this low moves away. It is slowly moving away, but it is still bringing fairly tightly packed isobars there in the north, and gales around northern and northeastern shores of Scotland, along with some persistent rain for northwest Scotland. Showers elsewhere, mainly across western Scotland, Northern Ireland, western England and Wales. But you can see Midlands, East Anglia, southeast, seeing plenty of clear skies overnight. And here, winds will fall away, so a touch of frost in places as we start off the day tomorrow, and a few mist patches. Once any mist patches lift, actually plenty of bright weather around first thing. Long spells of sunshine for many away from northern and western coasts, where there will still be further showers coming through. And then into the afternoon, some showers will develop elsewhere. Just about anywhere could see a shower, but they'll be well scattered, they'll be fleeting. And away from the showers, plenty of sunny skies. With light winds, not feeling too bad. Temperatures reaching 11 or 12 Celsius. But that wind is on the cold side, and it will push further showers into the north and the west on Tuesday night. Increasingly, a few showers will come in via the North Sea to affect parts of eastern Scotland, northeast England at times through the night. Away from the areas of cloud and showers, clear spells once again, however, and Wednesday begins on a chilly note with a touch of frost in places. But again, despite the chill, actually plenty of sunshine around first thing Wednesday. And on the whole, I think inland, fewer showers to come on Wednesday. Showers mostly affecting coastal areas. Similar again on Thursday, showers tending to ease inland, plenty of sunshine around, and then turning milder later this week.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Environmental activist, yep, you know the one, that pinch-faced, moody little teenager, Greta Thunberg, has described the climate summit, COP26, as just blah, blah, blah. She might be right about that. But Boris Johnson has warned world leaders that they will be judged with bitterness and resentment by future generations if they fail to tackle global warming. Around 120 heads of state and government are attending the World Leaders Summit at the start of the talks, where countries are under pressure to tackle climate change. Earlier in his speech to the summit, Prince Charles described COP26 as the last chance saloon and called for a vast military-style campaign of action.
The plea today is for countries to come together to create the environment that enables every sector of industry to take the action required. We know this will take trillions, not billions of dollars. We also know that countries, many of whom are burdened by growing levels of debt, simply cannot afford to go green. Here we need a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector. With trillions at its disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders, it offers the only real prospect of achieving fundamental economic transition.
Well, let's go back to our political editor, the wonderful Darren McCaffrey, who is at the COP26 summit. Well, there he is, King Climate, rather anachronistic of his time, really, because he's been banging on about eco matters for quite some time. But is he sort of slightly outstepping royal protocol at this summit?
Well, in many regards, people would suggest not, in the sense that I think there is a pretty universal consensus that climate change is an existential threat to the future of the planet, that it is something that needs to be addressed. The details, of course, are the controversial bit. How precisely do you get there, and how fast, and what are the means to do so? You're right in saying Prince Charles has been saying this, almost banging on about it. I'm sure he would say for the last couple of decades, almost a sense you get of "I told you so," considering he's been talking about environmental issues really since the 1970s. Do people feel uncomfortable with it? I'm not entirely sure they do. I'm sure there are people who possibly disagree with that. But on the whole, this is an agenda that Prince Charles has pushed over many, many years. And it's one that he thinks people are now finally listening to. What he wants them to do, Alex, is to act. But, you know, he is only among one of many, many voices that we've heard today here at COP26. Everyone from, of course, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who said this was the moment of the truth, that the world needed to act now, through to President Biden, who said that climate change was already destroying the livelihoods of millions of people across the country and would threaten trillions more in terms of the economic damage in the years to come, to Emmanuel Macron, who's using the slogan of "Make the planet great again."
And how's he been received at conference? Because obviously the wonderful Queen has not been able to go there, which I'm sure has disappointed a number of delegates. Everyone loves Lizzie, don't they? But what about Charles? Has he had a very warm reception at that conference?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think it's always really, really good to remember that the royal family do actually hold a big sway and an influence when they attend events like this. we know it happened. It's pretty unusual, though, it must be said, for members of the royal family. I mean, Prince Charles went to the G20 yesterday to attend kind of political events like the G20, though he did, of course, along with other members of the royal family, go to the G7 in June. Here, he's got a very positive reaction. He's just done a press conference, essentially, or a round of questioning, sat alongside President Macron of France, and there's going to be a big reception tonight here in Glasgow for the more than 120 world leaders who've gathered here, where the royal family will be front and centre again. It is a reminder, I think, of the draw, I suppose, the royal family have, even for the most experienced of world leaders. But this is not all just about them. There are 30,000 delegates here, Alex, from over 200 countries around the world. They're going to spend the next couple of weeks, when the politicians go away for, a week or so, trying to get down to the nitty-gritty to see what they can agree. And it's going to be pretty difficult. That's why lots of the leaders here are pretty pessimistic, not least of all Boris Johnson, about the prospect of a deal, trying to cajole, convince, almost shame other world leaders into taking action. We've just had a speech from Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, saying that he is not likely, and India is not likely, to get to carbon neutral by 2070. Now, that's a whole 2 decades later than the aspiration here is for COP, that is 2050, for the world to be carbon neutral. Narendra Modi would make the case that actually, even though India as a whole is a big emitter of carbon dioxide, with more than 1 billion people on a per person basis, is it way below what we do here in Britain or the United States or elsewhere. Though some would suggest at least he is here, unlike other world leaders who've not turned up, such as President Xi of China, Vladimir Putin from Russia, President Bolsonaro of Brazil, and Turkey's President Erdogan, that they are not at this conference. And again, with them not here, even though the delegations are, what sign of confidence does that send that a deal can be done in the next couple of weeks?
Darren, thank you so much. There you are. The entire naughty corner have naughty cornered themselves and not even bothered arriving. Well, still to come on the afternoon agenda. 400 years on, should the Scottish Church say sorry for burning witches? Plus, you get the final word on our issue of the day, boomers and the generational wealth gap. First, it's time for the news headlines with the wonderful Polly.
Good afternoon. Your latest GB News headlines. As you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has urged world's leaders to take action on climate change, telling them it's 1 minute to midnight, and if they don't get serious now, it'll be too late for our children tomorrow. The Prime Minister was speaking on the opening day of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow. Among the heads of state present, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that attacks on pollution would be key to driving down global emissions. A train driver involved in the Salisbury crash on Sunday is suffering life-changing injuries. British Transport Police confirmed there were no fatalities, but 13 people were taken to hospital. They say there's no evidence the train struck an object just before the crash. And national rail inquiries say disruption following the crash will last for several days. The UK could take legal action if the French don't back down over the post-Brexit fishing row. The dispute comes after UK and Jersey authorities denied licences to small French boats last month. President Macron warned France will introduce more stringent port and border checks on the UK if it doesn't ease the dispute soon. But the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has called the threats unreasonable, suggesting the hardline stance might just be because of the upcoming French election. And if you've had 2 jabs of the COVID vaccine and they were over 6 months ago, as of today, you don't need an appointment for your booster jab. The 3rd injection is now being offered at walk-in centres, the NHS aiming to increase jab uptake ahead of what they've described as a challenging few winter months ahead. I'll be back at 6 with more. Now, back to Alex.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. Prince Andrew and his legal team have turned the tables on his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, by claiming that she previously trafficked underage girls for the paedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke of York's lawyers filed a 36-page motion to dismiss the US civil suit brought by Virginia Giuffre, in which she accuses the prince of rape. The document also shares fears of Prince Andrew being targeted by accusations of victim blaming from women's groups as a result of the allegedly false accusations. Well, let's get the thoughts of royal expert, biographer and editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Sherwood. Ingrid, it's not going to go anywhere, is it, this case? But do you think that the response of Prince Andrew's lawyers was inappropriate, or do you think that actually taking the fight to town is what he really needs to do if he stands any chance of clearing his name?
I believe in the latter. I think taking the fight right into the ring is essential, or else he's never going to clear his name. And women's groups, of course, I mean, he can't win either way, whatever he does. And I think it was about time that he said something through his lawyers, obviously, and they really came out fighting. And they said it was payday for Guthrie, and that, she had actually acted as a madame for Epstein, and she was trafficking her friends. It was quite savage stuff. But, this is Prince Andrew's life on the line here, really. And he's suffered, not saying she hasn't, but let's look at it from his point of view. He has suffered this for a long, long time now, and it's ruined his life. Obviously, it's probably ruined a lot of other people's lives, which is part of the problem, because he never showed remorse. But I think his lawyers had to come out really fighting hard, which is what they've done.
Do you think that he'll ever be able to recover from the stigma that's forever going to be attached to him now? I mean, even if he manages to win this case and believes he's cleared his name, he's never going to be able to, is he?
No, I don't think he'll ever. Somehow I think that this will stick forever, because there's always going to be people that think he's lying. There's always going to be people that think that Virginia Giuffre is lying. I don't see that it will ever be clear. And I think, Andrew's reputation is ruined. It depends how short people's memories are, but this has been going on for such a long time. And it's such an important thing, and it's such a viable thing now, with women of the world really standing up for themselves. And I don't think whatever happens, it's going to go away. But I think he definitely had to take the gamble.
How much do you think this the Queen as well? I mean, we're often told that Andrew is perhaps her favourite son. I don't know how true that is. But, I mean, this whole process must be extremely uncomfortable for her, not just as monarch, but as mother.
I think any mother would, side with their son. She obviously believes that he is innocent. So it must be very stressful for her, and it must be very stressful for her to see him, sort of just hanging around, unable to do anything, unable to progress with his life. And also how hurtful it is for his family, for Beatrice and Eugenie. And then, of course, there's all the other side of it and all the people that, have been more hurt by the revelations than Andrew has. So it's a bit of a no-win situation for everybody, I feel.
And the royal family in general, we know the Queen's been advised to take a break over the next few weeks, and we really do hope that she is rested and fully recovered and back to fighting fit form. But the original plan was that following the death of Prince Philip, that the royal family would be supporting the Queen a lot more. But it seems they're dropping in numbers significantly. Harry and Meghan gone to America, Prince Andrew taken out of circulation. I mean, how desperate is the situation in the palace?
Well, I don't think the situation's desperate at all. I think the other members of the Queen's family have really stepped up to the mark. I think it's put quite a lot of pressure on the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, but they seem perfectly happy to accept that. I mean, the Princess Royal could hardly do more. She works so hard. The Prince of Wales works so hard. The Duchess of Cornwall, she's certainly stepped up and doing a huge amount more. So I think everybody is there. And to support the Queen in her old age, or let's not say in her advanced years rather than old age. I don't think she doesn't like being called old.
And quite right too. Ingrid, always lovely to speak to you. Ingrid Stewart there, royal expert, and may I just say, God save the Queen. The Church of Scotland is preparing to apologise for its role more than 400 years ago for thousands of people accused of witchcraft. Witch hunts were carried out from the mid-16th to the early 18th century. Accusations of witchcraft were 4 times higher in Scotland than anywhere else. The campaign is seeking a pardon for those convicted and an apology. Well, the very Reverend Dr. Susan Brown from the Church of Scotland told us that an apology on behalf of the Church would have to be made by the General Assembly. She added, we welcome a wider national conversation about that history and of its treatment of those accused of witchcraft, a conversation that would also examine the role of local magistrates, town councils and the Crown. It is through a deepening of our collective understanding and through reflection on the causes that we begin to reach the truth, and more importantly, it will help improve current culture where, sadly, women still bear the brunt of societal violence in so many ways. Well, let's delve into the history now with Diane Purkis, who is a Professor of English Literature at Oxford University and author of a number of books on witches and witchcraft. Now, Diane, I mean, quite fitting, really, straight after Halloween that we should be talking about witches. But explain this period in history, because we've got this sort of very two-dimensional image right now, don't we, of witches as, bimbling about on broomsticks with black cats sitting on the end. But that wasn't quite the scenario about 400 years ago, was it?
No, not at all. The majority of people accused of witchcraft in Scotland, if I can stick to Scotland for now, were just ordinary people. Some of them may have advertised themselves as having magical services that they could perform that might help in day-to-day matters. My favourite is being able to find lost objects. So if you lost your keys or you lost your wallet, you could go to what was called a cunning woman, and she would help you do some magic to help you relocate them, a kind of iPhone location service through the supernatural. And this all seems pretty harmless stuff. But what ended up happening was that angry neighbours or property disputes or trivial disputes about Christian doctrine could escalate into a witchcraft accusation, which would see these basically quite nice, harmless women in court and in danger of their lives.
And what happened if a woman was accused of being a witch? And was it just women, by the way, or were men accused of witchcraft as well? And if that happened, they were found to be guilty, what happened to them?
Well, let's start with the fact that, yes, the majority of Scottish witches accused were women. 85% of accused witches in Scotland were female. But there were male witches as well. And the punishment was the same if you were convicted. As far as we know, and you have to bear in mind historical records aren't perfect, yeah, you're showing a very, very relevant image here, because what happened was that you were burned at the stake. Normally there was a mercy strangulation first, so you weren't burned alive, but there were some cases in which people were in fact burned alive. And before that, of course, you were tortured in most cases to produce a confession. This happened much less often in England. Torture was a normal part of the Scottish witchcraft trial procedure, unfortunately.
Why? Why did Scotland have such an appetite for this? Because doing a teeny bit of background reading, my understanding that in Salem, where we know that the location in America where it's infamous really for witch trials, the number was in the hundreds, whereas in Scotland, we're talking thousands, aren't we?
We are definitely talking something in the region of 3,500 trials that we know about. There may be others that we don't know about. So that is significantly higher than in England. We can have a moment of mild moral superiority for once. And unfortunately, as part of that, one of the likely reasons is actually that Scotland featured a very strongly Calvinist church, which had very absolute ideas about what counted as good and what counted as evil. And that sat alongside and was kind of imposed on a culture that still had a lot of supernatural beliefs that were more old-fashioned, like a belief in fairies, for example. It's kind of harmless, it's pretty even, but to a member of the Presbyterian Kirk, believing in fairies is the same as worshipping demons. They didn't make any distinction between grey and black. Everything was either bad or good. And as a result of that way of thinking, they did consign a lot more people to witchcraft than had been the case previously and had been the case in less intolerant kind of ecclesiastical regimes.
That always massively interests me is how societies and cultures develop certain imagery. And what about the sort of very distinct imagery of the witch, the pointed black hat, the broomstick, the cat? Where does that find its origin?
18th century engravings on witchcraft pamphlets, really, and some of the art that's based on it. The cat does have a bit of an origin, but it's not very relevant to Scotland. In England, it was believed that witches had a particular demon that worked for them that often took an animal form. And sometimes these demons were identified with an old woman's pet, quite commonly a cat, but also sometimes rats or mice or flies. So that's the cat origin. And it's also that cats are seen as a bit hard to tame, a bit wild, and so a bit evil and satanic. The broomstick, very not English and not particularly Scottish either. When people flew in the British Isles to witchcraft sabbaths, they didn't mostly use broomsticks. So that's really more of a European import, if you like. And the hat is just the kind of hat that people wore in the peak era of witch hunting, a big Puritan kind of a pointy hat. And so that ends up being attached to the witch through art that tries to represent the period of the trials.
Professor Purkis, it's been fascinating talking to you about witches. Let's do this again. I want to learn more. Professor Diane Purkis.
Definitely. Do you be one? Do you want to actually set yourself up as a witch?
Do you know
this
what?
Is quite a thing nowadays.
I've got the cat. I've already got the cat, and I'm pretty sure she is possessed by some sort of demon spirit. So one could say I'm about 30% of the way
mine
there.
are for sure. So, yeah. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will be asking your advice on broomstick flying anytime soon. I could certainly do with a few spells up my sleeve. That'd be nice to know. Professor Purkis, fascinating stuff. Witches, eh? Now, it's time for you, the viewer, witches, wizards, all of you, to have the final word on boomers. Yes, boomers, not broomers. Are we penalising the young too much to pay for the elderly? Well, Joyce says no, definitely not. The elderly have put in an enormous amount into the system. Jeff says, you keep talking about great pensions, but why don't you put a figure to what you think is a great pension? Not sure I've said anything about a great pension, but good point. Also, great wealth should be qualified with figures. I've worked long and hard and also saved, so now you want to penalise me for having good work and saving ethics to benefit the young and the lazy. I don't want to penalise you, but if you do want to help me pay for a deposit on the house, I wouldn't say no to generosity. Paul says, I thought we were supposed to be an equal society. It is very unfair that some people have to pay and for the same, some get it free. Well, very true. Clive says, the young will only be paying for those unfortunately living on benefits. The rest will self-finance their old age. They have no choice. Richard says, each generation is better off. Young people spend too much on the latest technology, new cars, and they're not good savers. They have to have brand new everything. Douglas says, to say the young are supporting the elderly is a complete joke. They don't start work until they're 19 or older, if anything. The elderly have supported the young. I started working at the age of 15 and paid my dues. Gerald says, there are millions of quite comfortable thank you pensioners. More than half of pensioners have more disposable income than those in work. Any home-owning pensioner can release income against the value of their property. Robert says, baby boomers have had to work hard for what little they get now. Look at the very high numbers of pensioners living on the breadline and lower. The youngsters now want everything and more and don't want to help or respect the old. Jeff says, not true to say the young are being penalised. We paid in and are now taking out. We worked hard and saved, something the young don't want to do. I'm not sure young people don't want to not work hard. Everyone I know very much does. Barbara says, kids now go on about fees, but they don't have to repay anything unless they're in a well-paid job with a salary most pensioners would call huge. I've seen both generations and it's so easy now. If you can't see that, then you're one of the privileged. Well, thank you to all of you. What a fascinating programme it's been today, and I hope you'll continue to join me for the rest of the week. I've got a bumper week of shows coming up for you. We've also got a poll result in. We've asked, are we penalising the young too much to pay for the elderly? What do you think that result is? Well, guess what? 56% say no, but 44% of you actually say yes. Something tells me that might be doing the rounds on social media amongst all those young whippersnappers unable to get their first house. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Do join me again tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the wonderful Michelle Dewberry with Tubes & Co. But now, let's have a little look at the weather, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hi there. It's been another blustery day across the UK, but overall the wind does ease somewhat over the next 24 hours. Clear spells for many, but further showers in places, especially during Tuesday. Low pressure is moving away. That's brought a strong wind during recent days and some fairly heavy rainfall. But as that pushes away, the isobars open up, particularly across southern parts of the UK, with the winds easing here and clear spells expected. Northern and western parts of the country see further showers arriving overnight, but away from those showers, temperatures falling. We're looking at perhaps a touch of frost in places as we start off Tuesday, and a few mist patches for sheltered parts of southern England in particular. The mist continuing through to mid-morning, I think, in places, but away from the mist, away from the showers, actually plenty of blue skies about first thing. It will be a chilly start to the day, but actually, with that sunshine, feeling pleasant enough. Showers continue for northern Scotland, western shores as well, and then a few making their way inland as well. So just about anywhere could catch a shower, but they'll be fairly fleeting, and away from them, good spells of sunshine, highs of 9 to 12 Celsius. Any showers inland then ease away on Tuesday night. Lengthy clear spells for many, but some areas of cloud and showers will drift south, mainly affecting western and eastern coasts, but one or two making their way into central areas. Away from the showers, once again under clear skies, a touch of frost possible just about anywhere really on Wednesday morning, away from coastal areas. But further showers will be affecting those coastal areas we start on Wednesday, with plenty of sunshine in between. And on the whole, Wednesday looks like a fine, bright day. The wind pushing showers into North Sea coasts, further showers for parts of West Wales, Cornwall, Northern Scotland, Northern Ireland. It will feel cold in that wind as well, and temperatures on Wednesday and Thursday below average across the country. By Friday, fewer showers, a little milder.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.